Happy Thursday, everybody. Welcome to Wayne and Steve with the Talking Pools podcast group. Hope everybody had a great week and is safe from all these weather conditions that are happening over the country. But today, what we're going to talk about is something that actually came up within our little Talking Pools subgroup. All of us hosts get together and kind of bitch, moan, and complain and ask questions and whatnot to each other pretty much every day, sometimes all day long. But something came up yesterday, and it had to do with one specific kind of testing, TDS testing, which I'll talk about a little bit. But the question came up was that, what are the tests you should be doing? Whether you're a residential service guy or gal, or you're working on commercial properties, what kind of tests are the most common ones? So that's what we kind of want to hit a little bit about today, Steve, is to see what's out there and what you should be doing as opposed to what you're probably doing. There's a big difference.
The mobile WaterLink Spin Touch allows pool and spa professionals the ability to test water in the field. A patented WaterLink Spin reagent disc is used with the innovative photometer to measure 10 different tests in just 60 seconds. That's right, just 60 seconds, and you'll have results displayed simultaneously on the photometer's touchscreen. That's not all. You also have the ability to send the data through Bluetooth into a smartphone or a tablet device. The photometer can measure free chlorine, bromine, total chlorine, combined chlorine, pH, alkalinity, hardness, cyanuric acid, copper, iron, phosphate, borate, biguanide shock, and salt. The water analysis can be proactive since they are able to measure all of these important tests and recommend correct procedures to fix their water chemistry issues when using our WaterLink Solutions Pro software program. It allows pool and spa analysts the best way to achieve precise results. So simple, anyone can use it. This is the most advanced system for precise use of wet chemistry methods ever produced. Pool and spa analysts can achieve precision without time-consuming tests or cleanup procedures. This groundbreaking analysis system is so simple, no vials to fill, no prep time, no guessing. To learn more about this innovative lab, visit www.waterlinkspintouch.com. Again, www.waterlinkspintouch.com.
Obviously, when you're talking residential or commercial, it doesn't really matter. You're going to need a sanitizer test. Obviously, chlorine is going to be 99% of the time what it's going to be. But you want the kind of chlorine test that's going to give you your free chlorine reading. We should know, that free chlorine is your active sanitizer and oxidizer. That's the good stuff. That's what you want in the water, doing what you want it to do, killing and oxidizing. And the color that develops when you do that test is pink, not yellow. That's something completely different. If you're a service person working on a residential pool and you're using yellow, shame on you. Bad service person. Okay. You need to know what that free chlorine reading is. If you're working on commercial, that's the only one you can get is free chlorine. You're not allowed to use the other kind of chlorine test, which is called a total chlorine test or orthotolidine. That's a yellow color. That's not going to give you that breakdown. And in fact, some states consider orthotolidine a potential cancer-causing substance, like California. Stephen.
Yeah.
Yep, it does. So you got to have that DPD test, and that's that pink color, and that's mandatory. And the second test that's the most common one is your pH test. Now, I'm pretty confident in saying is that just about every health department in the country that has pool regulations, some of them don't, but most do, require a sanitizer test and a pH test. They don't know why the pH test. They just know they have to have it. All right. And the why could take me 4 or 5 other broadcasts, but chlorine is a sanitizer and pH are the top two. That's a must. Okay. Now, I also get the question, how often should you test it? And that's kind of tied into this too. With sanitizer testing, it should be done if it's a residential pool, and you're on a contract, whatever the contract says, once a week, twice a week, whatever it happens to be, once a month, whatever. But you should also be instructing your homeowner, your pool owner, to test the pool in between. Even if it's with a test strip, a real quick DPD test strip for chlorine is fine. And like I always tell people, I'm not a big proponent of test strips, never have been, probably never will be, but the purpose they serve is a quick and simple, am I where I need to be? If I'm not where I need to be, then you get a hold of your service person, or you have another test kit that's going to give you a better number, better methodology to get that number.
And Wayne, I want to stop you there for 1 second. That's an awesome point that you just made. But really, no one is going to do that as far as homeowners go. I've never met a homeowner or someone even at a commercial pool that really is going to do what they're supposed to do unless they've went through the CPO class. Mm-hmm. So what I ask of them, and guys, you should be doing this of your clients, you should say, hey, you're at the pool every day. Anytime you go out in the backyard or you look out the window, look at the pool. And if it doesn't look clear and it looks a little bit cloudy or hazy, mm-hmm. call us then. And then I can send someone out the next day. Mm-hmm. Because sometimes if you don't have chlorine in the pool, let's say on a Sunday and you went on a Friday and it just ate it all up because of phosphates or heat or whatever. Now it's 4 or 5 days that your pool is going to be. And by the time you get back on a Friday, you have to bomb it with chlorine now. So now you're way behind the 8 ball. So I love having your client dip the strip. I don't know how realistic it is for my clients to do that, because most of them, whether they're rich or they're struggling, they're paying us to do the pool, so they don't want to do anything.
Yeah. And the other thing to point out too is that, looking at the pool is part of the process of service. And even though, and I've even seen these pools too, that they look perfectly clean, but yet something's really wrong with them. So, you do that with with a little bit of a closer eye, but visual is absolutely mandatory. Go ahead.
No, and for me, like if we're sticking with the chlorine test and the sanitizer test, I want to stick with that for a second.
Okay.
And while you were talking, you didn't even see me, but I pulled in, one of our test kits over here.
Oh, look at that.
And started laughing. So you worked for this company. I have no affiliation for Taylor or anything like that. They are the test kits that we use. And the reason being, I like the LaMotte test kits as well. I love the Color Q test kit if you're colorblind. For me, it doesn't matter what type of test kit you use, but I want you to use something that's not colorimetric. I would rather you use a titrametric test for the sanitizer, because then if you put in 5 drops, that the chlorine is at 3 parts per million. If you're doing it to the lower one where you're getting every drop is 0.5, you could do it to every drop is 0.2 as well. But with the color comparator test, right? The colorimetric test, I forgot my powder the other day, and I had to do a test, and I looked at it and I put it on the wall against the white wall, and I was like, this, it looks like 3, it looks like 7. I was like, I have no idea what it is, And then I went to my car I got it and I was like, okay. And it was at 4. And it looked like it was between 3 and 7. So it could have been 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7. So what if you thought it was 7 and you were like, oh, I'm just going to leave this pool the way that it is. And then next week you come into a green pool. Also, when we put in our sanitizer, when we put in liquid chlorine into the pool, we're not just putting liquid chlorine into the pool. We're measuring out, if we're putting in half a gallon, we're putting in 4 16-ounce cups of liquid chlorine. And that is a half a gallon. That leaves a half a gallon in there. If you don't do that, you're literally pissing away chemicals. And they're $10, $11, $12 a gallon for chlorine. So if you don't know what your chlorine level is at, how the hell are you going to know what you're supposed to put in the pool?
Exactly right. Underdosing and overdosing.
So you have to do that with chlorine, and then with pH, the pH test is pretty standard with no matter what test kit you're using, right? They're going to give you it's the drops or the pills or whatever it is. You're putting it in there, you shake it, you say, hey, it looks like this, and then they have some sort of an acid demand or a base demand test that can tell you, hey, this is how much acid or sodium carbonate you're going to put in there, right? pH.
But you'd be surprised. It was my experience that it was an acid or a base demand test was rarely done. I can't tell you how many times that I would ask somebody, well, did you do a base demand test? What's that? It's what's in your kit.
No, I didn't know that for a while. I probably learned that about like 12 years ago or so, like
Yeah.
5 or 6 years after, 8 years
Mhm.
after I got into the industry.
Yeah.
I just was like, oh, what do we use these for? And then I finally figured it out, and I was like, oh my god, this tells me how much muriatic
Yeah.
acid exactly I need to put in. Like it's
Surprise.
crazy. I don't even have to do. You just go to one of the pages in the back,
Yep.
and it's a chart, and it says how big is this pool, how many drops did it take
Right.
you to get down to 7.4. Bam, you put in 1.5 gallons or whatever it may be. Right, and it's
Now, the other thing I wanted to point out too with timing is if you're dealing with commercial accounts and anything that's regulated by the local health department, the number of times you need to test for your sanitizer pH level will vary from state to state. Some states say once a day, some say twice a day. In Maryland, where I'm from, it's every 2 hours the facility is open.
same in New Jersey. Yeah.
Yeah, have a 24/7 facility. You're talking about 12 recordable tests, and not just writing a number and an arrow down at the bottom of the page. It's you got.
And then in some of the states, they will say if you have an automation system, like a chemical automation system, that now you don't have to do it now you only have to do it once, twice, or 3 times a day or whatever.
Exactly.
The rule of thumb for me, and Wayne, jump in on this if you think I'm wrong here, but if you're at a commercial facility and nobody's in the pool all day long, I want you to test the pool at the beginning of the day. I want you to test the pool in the middle of the day, and I want you to test the pool at the end of the day. And that it goes up from there. Like if people are in the pool, then I don't care if you test it every couple hours or every hour. If there's 50 people in the pool, test that pool every hour, because you're going to see, because the goal, especially if you're at a homeowners association or, at a pool where you're there all day long, you don't have to go to multiple sites. You're just there. Like the goal for you is at the end of the day to have a measurable residual of free chlorine that you can live with.
Right.
And again, you laugh at me because I say I want it between 7 and 10, and everybody's like, oh my God, that's so high. But, in Massachusetts, for example, they want you to keep it between 1 and 3, which I think is just laughable. Because even if you started out at 3 parts per million at the beginning of the day, and now you have a bunch of people in the pool, it's August, it's the weekend, it's hot, the heater might be on, right?
Yep.
So are you kidding me? By noon, it's going to be, by 10 a.m. If the pool opens at 8, it's going to be at 0. So now what are you going to do? You're going to throw in a bunch of chlorine while people are in the pool? And that's that's the main problem that you have, that you can't with these commercial pools. You can't really put in chlorine when people are in the pool, right? So I always say to people, and this is a hard one, I would much rather the maintenance guys at night backwash the filter and put in the chemicals and brush the pool at night. Because now you have 12 extra hours overnight before the pool opens up at 8 a.m. the next morning or whatever it is, where now if my service manager or I go there in the morning, let's say we show up at 6 a.m., now we backwash then, we put in the chemicals then, we vacuum and, brush then. This thing ain't going to be clear until 2 in the afternoon.
Yeah. And that makes sense. Makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
So sanitizer pH.
Now,
in grain.
One more with that though. Alkalinity, and most of the health departments are not saying that they want you to test for alkalinity.
That's right.
But alkalinity has to be grouped into those 3 tests. And that's a group, like chlorine, pH, and alkalinity. Every single time that you go to any single pool that you always test for chlorine, pH, and alkalinity. Whether it be multiple times a week. If you're there all day, I'm not going to tell you, do the alkalinity 7 times throughout the day. That's crazy. But I do want you to do it at the beginning of the day and the end of the day, And the reason that you're doing these 3 tests every time you're there is because these are the levels that move on a day-to-day basis, on a hour-to-hour basis,
right,
and sometimes on a minute-by-minute basis, depending on, how many people are in the pool and what you have going on. But these are the levels that could change a lot throughout one day.
Right.
And that's why they're so important to do it, And I always have everybody in my CPO class, I say, when we talk about the elements of water balance, I always tell them, hey, chlorine is the most important part of water balance, because if you don't have it, you're kind of screwed. But I was like, there's also 3 other things there's 2 other things that I want you to test. And I explained to them that I say, write down chlorine, write down pH, and write down alkalinity. I make them circle it. I make them put a star next to it. And I say, this might be the most important thing that I say all day to you. I say, if you are the person that is testing your pool and spa, okay, and you're the person that's putting in chemicals, every time you test the pool, you always have to test for chlorine, for pH, and alkalinity.
And that's a good method to follow, because you're exactly right. It can change bather loads, environment, source water, all sorts of reasons. Now with the other tests,
yeah,
what do you got left? Well,
so wait, let me clarify here too, though. Also with this, that with residential pools, usually you're there once a week. Right. So for those accounts, you're going to do chlorine, pH, and alkalinity every time you show up once a week. And then I make my guys the first week of the month, we do a full panel test. And that's what we're going to move into right now. But for commercial clients, we're usually there 3 days a week. So for the 3 days a week that we're there, we do chlorine, pH, and alkalinity. Mondays, I make them do a full panel test.
Okay.
And the reason being is because, the full panel test includes the cyanuric acid or includes the, all the other stuff. But also, don't be fooled here. Like, why tell my guys, like, if you had to put cyanuric acid in the pool and it's the first week of the month and you tested it and it was at 20 and you want to bring it up to 50, but you only really brought it up to 40, like, dog, next week you need to test the cyanuric acid again.
Right.
Like, my guys will let it go. If you don't say anything to them, they'll just let it go for another month. And it's like, what good is it going to do you if you check the cyanuric acid at the beginning of next month and now it's down at 0? So now you had 3 weeks where you didn't have any cyanuric acid in the pool, and now you're just pissing away chlorine into the pool.
Right.
So again, sorry to stop you on that one, but I just wanted to clarify on the sense of like, when are we doing these tests? Right. So, full panel test once a week for commercial clients, full panel test once a month for residential clients.
Okay. It's realistic.
Yeah.
Okay? And cyanuric acid is one of those tests that personally, I think they suck, but you got to work with what you got, wait till that little black dot disappears. And, I can't tell you many times I've seen people say, oh, it just hazed away and I can still see it. So that must be the answer. No, the word disappear means disappear. You can't see it anymore. So
it's also,
without getting into that 2-hour discussion,
it's also anything under 30 doesn't show you either, which is kind of like, okay, cool, it's under 30, but like, is it at 25 or is it at 5?
Yeah, so well, there are also cyanuric acid tests available that will measure that very low number and will also go very, very high, up to 6,000 parts per million in some cases. So God forbid you should do that, but excuse me, they are available to check with your supplier.
Right. So, okay. So cyanuric acid, we jumped into that, but let's talk about what a full panel test entails here, Wayne. So we have the everyday stuff, which is the chlorine, the pH, and the alkalinity. So now we're going to do our full panel test. What other tests are we doing?
Calcium hardness.
Calcium hardness. I agree. Yep. So calcium hardness is absolutely one in there.
Yeah. Now, calcium hardness doesn't dramatically change a whole lot unless certain things happen.
Right.
What are those certain things? Big weather events. Hello, hurricane. Okay.
Yeah.
Where the water's been diluted and it's backwashed out or overflowed, whatever. Excuse me for the coughing. If for some reason you're shocking with cal hypo, but you're overdosing it, but whether you realize it or not, calcium hypochlorite.
Yeah, one of the main ingredients is calcium.
Very, very minor. If it's a new pool, freshly done pool, freshly plastered pool, and you're adding water to it, part of the whole process of curing is getting that plaster to the water that's incoming. And if your level of calcium hardness is too low on your calcium hardness, you've got some problems. Perfect example. In Maryland here, in the Baltimore area, Baltimore City water, calcium hardness comes out of my tap in my kitchen at about 50 to 60 parts per million. Which means that if I had that low calcium hardness water to a brand new pool, the water is going to try to balance itself. And it balances itself by seeking calcium from the surface. So it's going to start pulling the calcium out of that gunite, even out of some paints or like that.
Yeah, paint, gunite, it'll ruin the whole surface.
Yep. Yeah, it'll fall down and chip, and the paint will chip, and you go, what the hell happened? Right. Water's doing its thing. It's doing its thing. So, again, calcium hardness, not necessarily you do need to do something every day. Don't need to. Even a week is and once a month is usually good unless something happens. Okay, for whatever particular reason. Then the other test that you should be doing as far as water balance is concerned, is it's not really a test per se you're going to have in your kit, but temperature, because temperature it plays a role in water balance. You've got alkalinity, pH, calcium hardness, temperature, and then the last test is something called TDS, and this is where we got into that little discussion yesterday about TDS testing. What is TDS? Probably the most misunderstood parameter that you're dealing with. TDS, total dissolved solids. Basically, what it is anything, any chemical, any person, really, but anything that's added to the water over the course of its history that gets into the water, and because of there's so much water involved, the water that thing dissolves. That's why it's called total dissolved solids. You don't see it. After a certain point, it no longer becomes TDS, but becomes TUS, which is total undissolved solids.
So.
You can see it. Okay. When does that happen? Well, years, usually. Generally speaking, 5 to 7 years is where most of the time TDS starts to play a role. You shouldn't let your TDS level get greater than about 1,500 parts per million from your incoming level. So that means that, again, let's go back to Baltimore. Baltimore's TDS out of the tap, about 400 or 500 parts per million. Okay. Right. Which means here you can go up to 1,500, 1,900, maybe 2,000 and still be okay. Okay.
Yeah. They say when you go 1,500 above where you start at, they want you to drain the whole pool, right?
They want you to drain or at least partially drain.
Sure. Yeah. Get some of it out there.
Yeah,
the way that I kind of think about TDS is like I think about a glass of water, and then you take like a tablespoon of salt, and you just keep adding salt to it and mixing it in. At some point, that liquid water is going to turn to this weird sludge, and that's when it turns to that undissolved solid. Right? It's the same type of thing. And I always kind of explain it. I always tell this story in my CPO class. I say, hey, if we were alive in the 1700s and we only bathed once a week. We got to go and bathe in the bathtub once a week, and 10 brothers and sisters would use the same water. What's it going to look like after 5 people get in that same bathtub? It's going to look terrible, right? And I say the only difference between the 1700s and now is we've learned how to sanitize the water and we learned how to filter out some of the contaminants, but all the TDS that's in the water in the 1700s is still in the water now. And then I give them a visualization and I say, have you ever seen a pool at night with the light on? And everyone will be like, oh, yeah. And I say, you see all that shit that's floating around in the light that looks like plankton? That's all like your dead skin cells and like hair follicles and all the stuff that can't be filtered out. And that's part of the TDS, right? And to build on that, when I go to an inspection, I don't test for chlorine, for pH, or alkalinity. You want to know why? Because I don't really give a shit. Because the pool, it's not my pool. And I'm looking for the long-term health of this pool. Maybe the pool guy was there yesterday and he shocked it, and I'm going to test the chlorine and I'm like, wow, this is through the roof. This is at 10. Right. Or maybe he comes tomorrow and the pool's kind of dirty and hazy and there's no chlorine. And I'm like, oh, this guy sucks. But I don't know what his schedule is. Same thing with pH and alkalinity. So like those things can move day to day, week to week. What I care about is, has this guy been taking care of this pool properly for the duration? And what I test for is I test for the TDS, I test for the calcium hardness, and I test for the cyanuric acid. And if those 3 levels are all through the roof, I know that this guy hasn't really been paying attention to the pool the right way that he should. And that just tells me like, hey, maybe this guy isn't taking care of the pool the way that he's supposed to.
Yeah. Now, the other thing about TDS testing that makes it kind of unique is that there is a liquid version, but it's really, really cumbersome. But the only efficient way to test for TDS is using a meter.
Yes.
Now, people hear meters and think, oh my God, it's going to cost me an arm and leg. But TDS is a test you don't need to do once a month, honestly. It's in most situations. I usually tell people every 6 months or once a year sometimes is good. Particularly if the water's been in there for a long time without replacement.
Right. Also, so always when you get a new client, though, you know what I mean? You go in a new spot, you got to find out what's going on.
Right. Or you're in an area that you've never been to before. Everybody's going to be a little bit different. But generally speaking, if the water in the pool has not been replaced even partially, say 5 years, maybe 7 years, you got an ongoing problem. Okay, that you're going to have to start draining the water out, refill it with fresh water, because high TDS water what happens is it slows up chemical reactions. The water looks dull and does not sparkle. I guess what a terrible way to put it. And it's just a bad situation altogether. So your basic test kit, let's put it like that, should have sanitizer, pH, alkalinity, hardness, cyanuric acid. Now, the other part of all this is that what about those other tests that we keep hearing about all the time? Phosphate, salt, nitrates. God, what else?
So there's metal, there's iron tests, there's copper
metals,
tests, there's a bunch of different
iron,
tests.
Yeah, exactly.
But the two that you just said, though, I do include those in my the salt test and the phosphorus test. I am testing for phosphorus once a month. And, for you, I understand that you're saying every 6 months to a year. But for you guys that are doing commercial pools, like I do some commercial pools that are like hotels they have hundreds of people in the pool a week. So like if you're having hundreds of people in the pool a week, like you can't be doing your TDS tests every 6 months. Like do it once a month. And again, the more people that you have in these pools, the more you have to work at this and the more you have to do testing and the more you have to stay on top of this stuff and the more those levels are going to creep up over time and the more that the day-to-day levels are going to move. So again, like I'm not going to treat the same residential backyard pool, even though I have residential pools that are 50,000 gallons. I'm not going to treat that pool the same way that I'm going to treat the 50,000 gallon pool that is, on a rooftop in downtown LA.
Right. Exactly.
Like where they have 800 rooms. Right. Like I have some clients that have 800 apartments on their place and they have two pools, and it's like, in the summertime, these things are getting crushed.
Yeah. And it was funny. Andrea posted a picture the other day. Excuse me. One of her pools. She said she hated this pool. The thing was lined with palm trees. And this is where kind of phosphate kind of runs into, and I'm not going to dive into a great big discussion about phosphates, but pools that are heavily landscaped, okay, the likelihood of phosphates getting into the water really, really high because of runoff. It rains. The plants are fertilized usually. That gets into the water. That adds phosphate to the water. All the trials and tribulations about phosphate. I'm not going to get into that. But that's why you need to test for phosphate. Because with phosphate, either you got it or you don't. Okay? And if you got it, you got a problem, you got to solve it. You got to take care of it. Thank God, the way to take care of it's pretty simple. Okay? Thank goodness. But then you have to determine whether that treatment process is something that has to be done all the time, or is it a one-time occurrence kind of deal? Okay? Usually it's most of the time. Then you have your salt test. And again, not diving into the whole salt discussion. And I do like salt pools, by the way. Don't maintain your salt level at the appropriate amount that the manufacturer of the unit tells you to. You just shot yourself in the foot. If that unit says, I need 2,700 parts per million of salt, to maintain or to create X amount of chlorine, make sure there's 2,700 pounds of salt, parts per million of salt in the water. Pretty simple. Salt test. Very, very simple to do. Very easy to do. So if you're dealing with a pool that's a saltwater generator, chlorine generator, whatever you want to call it, you have to have a salt test. Have to have one. Okay, just to make sure everything is running right and efficiently and doing what it's supposed to do. Okay. Some other tests, copper and iron. There's so many instances in which you need to test for copper, particularly if you're in an area geographically that you're near mountains, believe it or not, like the western states, the Rockies over here, my side, the Appalachians, you tend to see more metals in the source water.
Would you say that that's a preventative test or that's a reactionary test? Like what, you know what I mean? Like,
it could be both.
Like we should be testing for it every couple of months or something like that.
Especially, well, here's the deal. You should be testing for it if your source water is from a well.
Got it.
That's almost a guarantee you've got metals in them, almost a guarantee. Some municipal systems have a little bit of copper in the water, just a little bit, okay? I know Baltimore City water does like 0.05 parts per million, something ridiculously low.
Yeah.
That's not the problem. It's when it gets above 0.4, 0.5, then you can have a problem. But if your source water is from a well, you got to do a metals test, copper and iron. There's another metal that you can get in pool water called manganese.
Turns it purple.
Turns like little purple freckles. Yeah, it looks pretty great popsicle kind of color.
Yeah, I've had it happen with that where it's turned the whole pool purple. Where it's turned like the cartridges purple, and then I've had it happen where like it looks like it's purple, but it's actually the cyanuric or whatever it is that's coming out of a solution with, and that just means that you have really high cyanuric acid or whatever, right?
Right, exactly right. So,
and my point on the iron, if you are filling off a well, and this is whether you're filling off a well or whether you're filling off regular city water. At the very least, when you fresh fill a pool, I'm always taking a pair of socks and I'm zip tying it to the end of the spigot. The end of the hose. And if it's a white pair of socks, you'll see at the end, it's going to be like all brown, because it's going to pick up those heavier metals that are in there. And if you are in a place where they are using well water, I would implore you guys at Home Depot, they have these mineral catchers. Now, it's going to take forever to fill the pool as far as water pressure goes, because it's now, it's now filtering this water. So it's going to come out a lot slower. But if you have the time to do it, I would definitely, it's like a $20 or $30 piece that you could just buy at Home Depot. And they're just called mineral catchers. And they just look like these long tubes. And you just screw it to the end of the hose. And now you just put it in the pool. And it catches some of those heavier metals. And again, if you could start off with a cleaner, fresher water, and I use the word used up a lot. Like I say, like, how used up is this water? And I always explain to people that like used up is not time. Used up is use. And because like if you have a 1,500 gallon spa and you have 50 people going into that spa every day, like after 4 or 5 days, that water is going to have to be used up and you're going to have to get rid of it, where with the cyanuric acid and all that stuff, that takes a really long time to build up. But again, the TDS, it will build up really, really quickly if you have, the more people, the more primary facility usage that you have is going to bring those levels up, quicker.
Absolutely. So we've got copper, we've got iron. If you have a heater on the pool, I always recommend having a copper test handy or available. Let's put it like that. Because what if for some reason the heater goes up? 9 times out of 10, it's going to start leaching copper into the water. Okay. So always good to have. If you are dealing with systems like ionizers, the frog systems, the Nature 2 systems, that's a different kind of copper test. Okay. Still a copper test, but a different kind. So it's not the same kind as if you were testing full-blown total copper. Okay. A little bit different. So remember that. The only other tests that are available that you may need to do at some point that you may have to try to find is bacterial testing. And there are test kits available that will measure whether you have X amount of bacteria in the water to the point where,
like total coliform and stuff like that, or now because some of my clients have to do that in New Jersey, like you have to have a Garden State lab. You have to have them come out once a week and test. But what I've learned, and again, correct me if I'm wrong here, Wayne, but with the total coliform test, like I've had people fail that test before. And I've asked you, I've been like, hey, like, what is the solution to this? And you were like, they were like, shock the pool, but like, there is no real, clear cut. There's no real clear cut solution for this,
No, not really. Well, the only real solution is getting rid of the water, flushing everything out, filling it back up with water, doing a maser, like a 30 part per million shot. Most of the time, bacterial testing, if there's bacteria present, enzymes can work wonders sometimes, particularly if the issue is, say, a biofilm, and you can see a biofilm. That's really, that's the thing where after a thunderstorm, you look at the street and the oil in the street kind of create a little rainbow kind of effect. That's a biofilm.
Yeah.
It's also a biofilm, the thing on your teeth in the morning before you brush your teeth. That's biofilm. That's really gross, but that's a perfect example of biofilm. But enzymes will take care of that. But again, those are the major tests. I mean, I've also, now, with all that being said, I've had people where they've done all their testing, their numbers are right, some stuff is still wrong. What do I tell them? I said, well, the only thing is get a sample of water and go to a lab, a testing lab, maybe a Culligan, maybe an eco lab, maybe a local. I even send people to local high school chemistry departments and have them play around with water to see if they could find anything. Those are the extreme situations, and you rarely see that happen. But it happens. So I guess the point here is that whatever testing system you use, okay, I don't care who makes it. But whatever testing system you use it. Do the tests. Do the tests. Get the answers. Verify that your results are within the parameters where you need to be. And if it's past that point, then you start going to the next step.
Then you go into the Langolier saturation index.
Yeah. What is another whole episode?
No. I say that because in class, saturation index takes up like almost an hour and a half of class.
Yep. Yeah.
Once you get to talking about TDS and then you go into the sheets and stuff and you say, hey, and what I always tell everybody in class is I always say, hey, look, I'm like, you need to know this for the exam. I'm like, if you called me in the office and you were like, Steve, I'm having a problem with my pool, I just would have went through everything that you just went through in this episode. And then I would have said, hey, let's figure out the Langolier saturation index. Right. It's because it's not something that and the reason I say this is because if you guys are testing your chlorine, pH, alkalinity, cyanuric acid, calcium, calcium hardness, all that stuff, TDS once a week, and you're keeping all of those levels within the ideal ranges, guess what?
You're good.
You're going to be 90% of the time, you're going to be balanced. I know. Is there a certain time where, the Langolier saturation index doesn't work? I have seen it where, like, if the temperature is really high and the pH is really low and the TDS is really high, like, you could get like a funky, like, it tells you you're balanced and you're not. But again, as long as you keep your chlorine level where it's supposed to be, you keep your pH between 7.4 and 7.6, you keep your alkalinity between 80 and 120, and your cyanuric acid between 30 and 50, and your TDS under 1500, then usually you're good. And like I said, it's not that I'm hating on the Langolier saturation index. It's just like I'm super strict with everything that you said, like, oh, let's test like every month or every 6 months or whatever. Like for me, no, we're doing it once a month or we're doing it once a week. Yeah. And the reason being is because we have so many clients now that you have 80, 100 plus clients. How do you remember, which pool was what? Like, I don't even remember what I had for breakfast last Tuesday. You know what I mean? Like, so how are you gonna remember when you did 12 pools today, even what your second pool alkalinity was? You're not going to remember unless you take really good notes. So that's why people use, Pay the Pool Man or Skimmer or whatever, application peoples are going to use to capture that information. People do it and they pay for that because it's become an integral part of your, the service that you're providing, right?
Right, exactly right. And I kind of want to wind up things with a final finger wag is that, okay, you're doing all this testing. That's fine and wonderful. It's great. But look at your test kit and the products that are in the kit, whether it's a powder or liquid or whatnot, and make sure that they're good. Okay. Because all those testing products, those reagents, those pills, those whatever, they have a shelf life. And they're good for only so long. And if you start using those test kits where those products have expired, and it's usually 2 years generally, then you can't trust your answers. You just simply can't. Okay. So now I know in the real world you're probably replacing a kit every year, if not more often, depending upon how much you test. Okay, yeah, I get it. Okay, but don't be fooled by. And this kills me too. I'll go into a retail store. Would go into a retail store and all of a sudden I see a clearance table. And on the clearance table is a test kit. You know why it's on the clearance table? Because the thing's 4 years old.
Yeah, because
they want to get rid of it. It's not going to be good. So just make sure that the kits that you're using are not expired. Okay. So what I want to do is, Steve, unless you've got anything else to say, I think we pretty much been yelling at each other now for about 40 minutes or so.
Yeah, no, we're good.
But and here's where the good stuff comes. We want to hear from you guys. We want to hear what you use as your testing products. How do you feel about the tests that you're doing? Are you confident with them? Do you wish you see another kind of test for something else? Oh, and by the way, there is no magic wand out there. I always get that question. Got it at the trade shows. It's something I just stick in the water can tell me. And it's like, no, not yet. Not for another 40, 50 years, maybe. Star Trek-y stuff. But let's hear from you all out there on what you use and how it helps you, how it doesn't help you. And we can take it from there. So for Mr. Steve and myself, thank you guys for listening. We appreciate you listeners. Please remember also there are other hosts on Talking Pools that would also appreciate your ear when you get the opportunity. And again, talkingpools@gmail.com is how you contact us. Please send us a little email. With that all being said, we'll talk at you next Thursday. Thank you, guys. Take care.
Have a
Bye-bye.
good one.